Welcome to episode 37 of Rebirth Revolution. My name is Melissa Olson. We've made it through another week. That's an accomplishment. I applaud you for keeping it together in whatever way your life configuration requires you to do so. You are facing a huge life flashpoint, one of the bigger speed bumps that may be in your path. Please give yourself the earned credit you are due for getting through this far without completely losing it. It matters that you acknowledge your strength and resilience. We are all just trying to make our way through our lessons here and survive to create a better world on the other side through the choices that we make. Our choices, both big and small, all matter. Our willingness to grow is the key to our success. Not everyone is keeping it together. We have talked extensively about people who are at the lower levels of spiritual awareness and the built-in deficiencies they struggle with, along with our struggle to protect ourselves from them. People who are still working through the lower levels of spiritual awareness are not bad people. They are people who have not grown to a point where their choices could be construed in any way as positive. They are working out of fear and misunderstanding. Those motivators will always lead to dark choices, and dark choices move you backwards. The job of sorting out those who are modeling higher level behaviors that move us forward from those who are here to actively move us backwards would be much easier if the low-level students would just carry a sign identifying themselves. You're in luck. They have made themselves abundantly clear. Your wish has been granted. The people you see in public spaces who are not wearing a face mask have self-identified as being lower-level people. How do we know this? People at the lower levels of spiritual awareness are consumed with self and not others. But it's interesting. You might think that being concerned with self would lead to wearing a mask for no other reason than to not be infected by others. But it isn't playing out that way. The lower level people are much more concerned with rebelling against being told what to do. Turns out the drive to say, "You're not the boss of me," is stronger than self-preservation. It's kind of a cutting off your nose to spite your face type of maneuver. When you are at lower levels, you are not open to the notion that there are those who know better than you. Your thoughts and feelings count more than scientific data or anyone who is knowledgeable about such things. You know better than everyone because you do not value anyone else. You tend to seek out the voices that allow you to make a bad choice, and those voices can always be found. If you think about it, in the past, when people were living in smaller communities with little knowledge of what went on outside of their community, you may have a person who's a real crackpot, and that person may be able to convince some in the community to see it their way. Now it only takes one crackpot anywhere in the world, and every low-level person will find them and amplify their message. Anything, and I mean anything, that you want to believe can be backed up by someone on the internet. So we have people who do not want to wear masks to protect themselves or others, and they find it easier to do what they want and more of a source of pride to fly in the face of any wisdom gathered by those who work hard to figure the world out. Fundamentally, even though low-level people think very highly of themselves and think they know everything that needs to be known, they feel deep down that they do not have the power that others have. The ache of not understanding what others understand brings about deep insecurity. The power differential for them can only be made up through external uses of power, like carrying assault weapons. I read a social media post by a man who was threatening to shoot anyone who told him to wear a mask when entering their business. His post ended with, "I have more power than they do. They just don't know it yet." The power he spoke of does not come from inside of himself. He doesn't have anything inside of himself that feels in control or an ability to surrender to what is. He is empty and feels challenged, and the only way to bring that up to a level of comfort for him is to threaten to shoot someone. Obviously, this didn't work out well for him. He immediately lost his job and law enforcement was sent to deal with him, which couldn't have made him ultimately feel any better or more powerful. The result is that he lost what mattered to him and had to be shown that, in terms of power, his use of external means still left him at the bottom of the heap. I feel bad for those who are still in the lower levels because they do not have the tools to figure out where their power lies. They do not have a way of seeing the world in a balanced way because they are still stuck on self and have yet to figure out the benefits of thinking of others. They still believe that thinking of others is a weakness and that thinking only of what benefits them is a strength. So they go without a mask. It does not matter to them that they may infect others. They can't extrapolate that should they expose the virus they do not yet know they have to a person in a store, that they are potentially exposing everyone that person is in contact with. The exponential spread is beyond their grasp. People who are at higher levels are not operating in such a heated fashion. Even if they were not to grasp the potential outcomes, they would put on the mask and go about their business without thinking it was a personal affront. Imagine the agony of moving about in the world when you think that everyone and everything is out to minimize you or make a fool of you. Because at the low levels, you do not care about anyone else. It is outside your grasp that anyone could be asking you to do something that might benefit you. You can't imagine that anyone else could care about you in that way, since you would never reciprocate. It is impossible to miss the misery when observing those who are manically protesting. The primal levels of the screaming shows you just how wounded these people are by what is going on. It's sad to watch, and knowing we are powerless to get through to them is felt deeply. That doesn't stop our empathy from feeling how lost and distraught they are. But we also must keep in mind our need to protect ourselves from them. They mean to do us harm. We need to recognize their limitations and respond accordingly, and we must never let the weakest in the herd choose our path forward. We also must save space for them, because someday they will grow to a higher level. We can't set the timetable for their growth. That only comes with the choices they make. But when they do grow to a higher level, they need to know that they will be welcome. Everyone is here to grow to higher levels. Some are just beginning, and others cannot figure out how to get out of their own way. So much of human nature is on vivid display. One of our propensities is being called into question as we deal with this challenge. One of them is one I've seen in young and old alike. It is that whatever you have suddenly becomes your set point. With children, I learned the hard way that anything special I did for my kids suddenly, in their minds, became tradition. If I baked a special kind of cookie, they would in all years that followed remind me that I needed to bake those cookies again, because that is what we do every year. It didn't take me long to get to the point where I had to think long and hard about anything new I would do once, because it would automatically become something I would have to repeat until the end of time. In the elderly, I've witnessed people who have shopped for, prepared, and cleaned up after every single meal their family ate become harsh critics of those who took over the work of feeding and cleaning up after them once they entered a retirement home. While you might think they would have profound appreciation for being let off the hook, they didn't. They became more critical and impossible to please. In fact, everything that was done for them that they formerly did for themselves only made them more entitled, more critical, and more unhappy. Whatever you have at any stage of life suddenly becomes your set point. It becomes what you are entitled to. This has reared its ugly head with those who have lived a life dependent on the labor and talents of others. And the more money you have, the more people whose labor becomes something you feel entitled to. They say money doesn't change you, it reveals who you are. But I've seen money move the line for people. I've observed people who never had anything done for them move into a world where people did things for them, and the more they did, the more entitled and dissatisfied they became. The more they expected, the less they cared about those who provide. Combine this with the feelings of powerlessness this challenge brings with it, and you see some really bad behavior. You see people berating store clerks for the lack of stock, the acquisition of which is surely above their pay grade. You see people furious that someone won't risk their professional license and resulting job because they won't cut or color someone's hair while it's outlawed during the pandemic. So this challenge is asking us, what if you aren't entitled to that? What if you aren't entitled to someone else's labor? What if you aren't entitled to endless supplies of anything and everything you want? What if you aren't entitled to the company and distraction of other people? What if you aren't entitled to a world that will accommodate your every wish? Who are you then? How do you react? This week we saw two things in the news. Jeff Bezos of Amazon fame is on the verge of becoming a trillionaire. And this week the decision has been made to rescind the hazard pay of $2 additional an hour for those who are working during this pandemic to make his fortunes. It's nearly impossible to reconcile these two ideas. The higher a person climbs the hill to acquire wealth, the more the people below, whose labor is used to generate the wealth, the more they must look like ants instead of fellow human beings. They also matter as much to the person at the top as does an ant. The view is very different from the top of the hill, but those who have died working in Amazon warehouses were real people whose lives mattered as much as his does. The amount a person has does not change their value as a human being. The deaths of these workers leave behind shattered, grieving families. They have futures that have been cut short, dreams unfulfilled. They have people in their lives who will never get over this. For them, it will be a tragedy that doesn't end. But, to be fair, those who remain in the warehouses have been given T-shirts to thank them for their service. So there's that. There is no better time than now to do this appreciation exercise. We have the time, and we have the need to cultivate these feelings. Sit in one place in your house and focus on what is around you. I sat near my front window, looking at what was in my vision as I faced the window. Here's what I observed. I see brick outside on my house's exterior. That brick was formed and baked in ovens. The bricks were loaded onto a truck and driven to a store that stocked them. Someone managed pallets of the bricks and made them available to the contractor who was building my house. A bricklayer patiently attached the bricks to the house and grouted them with a mixture that was made by someone else. Attached to that, I see a window frame that is beautifully designed to keep bugs and the elements out. It has tracks that allow me to open and close the windows. The window is comprised of 2 panes of glass with a grid inside. There is a locking mechanism that was forged of metal. Each of the many pieces of this window ensemble required different machinery to make, along with different workers to do the job. The carpenter installed the window and framed it in wood molding that came from a tree that was felled and cut into long straight pieces of wood. Someone stained and varnished each piece of the window molding before it was installed. There's a curtain hanging in the window. It is made of threads that were spun. A person created the subtle leaf and branch design. The spun thread was then weaved into that pattern. The edges of the curtain were expertly turned and sewn. The curtain has forged metal grommets that were then incorporated into the finished product. It was all ironed, packaged, driven to a store, placed on a shelf, rung up by a cashier, and brought home by me. Outside the window, I see a tree that was started in a nursery. It grew for a number of years, being watered and fed by growers until it was large enough to send to my local nursery, where I purchased the tree. I dug a hole and planted the tree, placing a ring of bricks someone formed and baked around the bottom of the tree. I've used tree food that was formulated, packaged, driven to a store, and rung up by a cashier to facilitate the tree's growth. I have watered the tree from the hose that was designed, manufactured, packaged, delivered to the store, and rung up by the cashier. Through that hose travels water that is provided by the city through pipes that were manufactured by someone, laid by someone else, in a trench that was dug by another. All around us, we benefit from the work of others. Every article is conceived, designed, and manufactured by workers. Any given room in your house is appointed by the workmanship and delivery and sales work of hundreds, if not thousands, of people. And the materials have come from all over the globe. Some people use mind-altering substances to have this experience, but that isn't even necessary. It just takes a few minutes of your undivided attention and a bit of imagination. One day I was on a brisk walk, headphones on, breezing past a nearby lake. It was a gorgeous day, but my eyes were on the path ahead. An elderly woman who was standing on the path waved me down. I stopped, took off my headphones, and listened to her story. She pointed out a squirrel and a duck. The squirrel had come down the tree and met the duck at the shoreline of the lake. They took turns expressing themselves in their own native language. The woman told me their conversation had been going on for quite a while. I stood there transfixed at this interspecies conversation. It was astounding. It occurred to me that day that most of the world is whirling around in amazing ways, and usually only babies and old people are noticing. The rest of us are too busy. We like to think that it is our duty to find everything that is wrong in the world and try to make it right. It is every bit, if not more so, our duty to take in everything that is beautiful and wondrous and celebrate that. Before we focus on what we wish we had, let's take the time to fully appreciate what we already have. And let's keep in mind all of the people who made everything out of nothing. Somehow, the guy who figured out how to put those things in a box and deliver them to us is going to become a trillionaire, but he didn't design or construct the things we love. Let's honor those people. Thanks for listening to another episode of Rebirth Revolution. Please pass along the news that this can be found on YouTube, in all the podcast outlets we've discussed, along with the most recent episodes now being on SoundCloud. If you have any questions for us, email us at rebirthrev@gmail.com or leave a comment on rebirthrevolution.com. Until next week, appreciate everything in your midst. Eat some good food, work some fun into every day, and know that you don't have to out-yell them. You need to outlast them. Remember, you're loved exactly as much as every other person on the planet, not 1 ounce more or 1 ounce less. Be strong and stay safe, and remember that your power is within you and it is limitless.